Welcome to Law and Justice. I'm Jane Mulcahy. This is a special series of how to talk policy and influence people. And today I'm really honoured and delighted to be joined by Mick Finnegan. Hi Mick, how are you?
I'm good, how are you?
I'm excellent. All the better now for chatting to you, I'm sure. Mick, before we kind of get into the details of your mental health advocacy and the work that you're doing now, maybe you can tell me a bit about yourself, please.
Yeah, my name is Mick Finnegan. I'm from the inner city in Dublin. I experienced homelessness at quite a young age. I managed to escape homelessness and work in health and social care for a period of time, but then due to the trauma that I experienced as a child, I ended up kind of having very severe mental health difficulties, which resulted in me being an inpatient within psychiatric services in the UK. Following a very successful and prolonged treatment program due to my inability to engage with services, I was employed by the NHS as a mental health peer support worker, and then later on as a national advisor with the Royal College of Psychiatrists National Collaborating Centre for Mental Health on their mental health safety improvement program, going into hospitals across the UK, dealing with kind of restrictive practices and looking at kind of implementing quality improvement initiatives.
Thanks very much, Mick. So you mentioned there that you've struggled with your own mental health for quite some time. And I believe you even tried to end your life a few times. And you mentioned childhood trauma there. Do you think that was very relevant to your mental and emotional distress, Mick?
Absolutely. I think it's like anything. If you don't address something, eventually it's going to be an issue. You know what I mean? If you have an outstanding mortgage payment that you ignore, eventually they're going to kick the door in and take the house off you. It's the same with mental health. If you ignore the trauma that you've experienced as a child, that's going to bubble up in some way, whether it's in your language, whether it's in kind of how you approach certain social situations. And for me, I struggled so much with that it ultimately led me to kind of trying to end my life back in 2009 in a very gruesome and public way, where I nearly got shot by the Metropolitan Police in London for climbing a bridge and shutting down the transport network for 4 hours.
Wow.
And I was very lucky that the guy that got me off the streets in Dublin, Howard Russell, who worked with the Salvation Army. He was the manager of the Salvation Army hostel at the back of Cleary's, on just behind off O'Connell Street, Cedar House. And it was a hostel that specialised in providing support and advice and guidance for rough sleepers in the area. And sometimes you'd get a bed and sometimes you wouldn't. And when I met Howard for the first time, I used to tell him, fuck off, don't be coming near me.
Yeah.
Get away from me. I was so angry because I was rejected as a kid and all that stuff. But he was consistent in the approach, in the support that he's provided to me for over 20 years. Like, he is like the nearest thing I would have to a supportive, loving, caring parent almost. You know what I mean? He talked me down off that bridge. You know what I mean? I remember what he said to me. He said, don't do this. I love you.
Wow.
And, those 3 words, it doesn't matter who you are, you want to hear those words, whether it's from a parent, whether it's from your partner, a loved one, your kids,
We need to hear them.
Completely, yeah. You need to have that constantly. Those positive words of affirmation and positive reinforcement do kind of, gives you a sense of value. I always say this to friends: know your worth. You know what I mean? My friends go on about like, oh, I'm dating this guy and he's fantastic, but he's so inconsistent and all this stuff. And I just, what do you think? And I think you need to know your worth. Know your worth. Know your value. Like, don't be, giving away your time, your energy into something that, if you're investing in something and you're getting very little back, then you're wasting your time. And that's my own opinion.
And so you grew up in Crumlin, Mick, which is an area sort of known for social deprivation and maybe poor opportunities for the inhabitants and drug problems.
Back then, yeah, and
Yeah,
now like it's up and coming. Like to look at the house in Crumlin, you'd need anything between 250 to 450,000
right.
euros. It's really weird. It's like I came
Yeah,
back. I lived in London for 17 years. I come back to Dublin, and I'm expecting to walk down the road through the park. You know, seeing all my mates and the kids
yeah,
playing football in their tracksuits and all that jazz, and then you see, Victor and Annabelle wheeling Hugo through the park in their chinos and neck shoes. And it's
yeah.
like,
It's
oh
been
my God,
gentrified.
completely, yeah. And it's like we wouldn't have had, like, there was loads of things like we wouldn't have had, for instance, there wouldn't have been a lot of like, coffee shops or, you wouldn't go for brunch.
Yeah,
You go for a fry up down to Matt the Rashers.
yeah,
You get a breakfast roll in the centre.
yeah,
You know what I mean? On a Saturday after playing football for Crumlin Rovers, you go into Four Roads and have a couple of pints. And
yeah.
that was literally like when you were a kid, you would do that.
Right.
But back then, growing up, I grew up in the flats, and grew up initially in Denard Avenue. As a kid, went to the local school there in St. Teresa's, and even made me communion in the church there in Teresa's Gardens. And it was poverty. It was, there was such like social deprivation. There was nothing, there was like, I remember as a kid, we were that poor, we had to rely on butter vouchers.
Okay.
And I tell people about butter vouchers and they think I am talking absolute shite. That didn't happen. There's no way that happened.
Well,
There's no way the government.
yeah, it sounds
That's
like
what I
much
say.
further away than.
They think like they've got these visions of like Angela's ashes and me eating up. Yeah, like they have these images of like kind of like like abject but it was poverty. It was food poverty. It was that's why we got the butter vouchers. And they also, but back in the day, butter vouchers also doubled as an insurance disc for your car because they used to come. I swear to God, they used to come.
Inventiveness.
I'm telling you, because the guards only wanted to see the month and the date.
Yeah.
And on the butter vouchers, it would have December 1994 or something, or 95 or whatever the date was. And people would used to put them in their cars, like just to get past, like say checkpoints or whatever.
Funny.
And the cars wouldn't even be insured, some of them.
Yeah. And so then it was a tricky place to grow up, and at the time there was problems with drugs. Am I right, Mick?
Massively, yeah. Like heroin was a big problem. My family especially was affected by that. I tragically lost my younger brother Kieran 2.5 years ago to heroin overdose.
Okay.
A preventable death. Had there been naloxone available in the hospital, but there was naloxone available, but they couldn't administer it because he wasn't prescribed it.
Okay. Oh my goodness.
For me, that's archaic in its approach. Now, I think it has changed now with input from services like Extern, who run amazing drug outreach programs in Belfast. I've worked in Belfast in homeless services, in outreach services, providing support for rough sleepers and providing needle exchanges and working with entrenched rough sleepers and street drinkers. And, we will be trained as, naloxone educators. We would show them how to inject. It's an intramuscular injection. Yeah. There is no, stimulant or, value to it. And, we would educate the local drug users in the area how to, use this if they come across a friend. Because most drug users use in pairs or they use in groups. And it was kind of more kind of having kind of that peer support element to, harm reduction more so. But I was really surprised that wasn't the case in Dublin, that you had to be prescribed naloxone, by a GP.
Yeah, I'm very sorry for the sad loss and as you say, preventable loss of Kieran. Did he start using heroin and other drugs as a boy in Crumlin?
Do you know what? I wouldn't know, and that's the truth, and that's because of the breakdown of the family unit.
Okay.
When I was younger, I was abused as a kid. I went to the police, and back then you didn't go to the police. You wouldn't speak to the guards. You wouldn't talk to the guards. And I was in the St. John's Ambulance Brigade, and as a cadet, and I was like, Jesus, look at those uniforms, look at the blue lights. I was like, to me, that was attractive. That was something that you know, and perhaps maybe that's where my social conscience maybe stems from. Who knows? I haven't a
Yeah.
clue. But I learned how to do first aid and stuff like that. But one of the senior members in that organization groomed me and abused me and ultimately raped me over a period of time as a child.
Yes.
Which when I went to the police at the time, when I tried to report it initially, they were just like, "Get the fuck out of here! No, I tell you, go on now with your lies." And then I went back and then I met a detective, Detective Dermot Saunders, and he was such a lovely man. Like he was just so compassionate and so kind, and you know, I broke down crying and stuff, and in the interview, and I remember him coming in like something out of Cagney and Lacey. Do you know what I mean? He had like the old, because detectives were all armed back then.
Okay, right.
And in Crumlin, I think the majority of detectives were dealing with serious organised crime.
Okay.
They were dealing with, you know, gangsters
and stuff, yeah.
Everyone, yeah, like he'd be proper, like, and then I'd be there, and you could see the leather strap coming across his, you know, the old gun,
yeah,
wherever he kept his service weapon or whatever, and I was just like, wow. And he said to me, "Don't worry, we'll get him and all this, and we'll sort it out." And but he arrested him, and your man gave me no comment interview, and at the time, there was no policy or procedure in relation to kind of, you know, sexual assault and rape for kids, especially quite recent. That happened, like, you know, at the time. So there was no kind of protocol, whereas now that I imagine, like I'm only going off what would happen in the UK, having worked in support services, you would be referred to a specialised clinic for support. DNA samples would be taken. You would get the best appropriate medical care. You'd be linked in with crisis counsellors. You'd be linked in with a liaison officer who would liaise with you, with the police force of the area that you live in, and they would be the go-to point. And that all kind of stems from kind of, you know, they don't want to re-traumatize the person by getting them to continually share what's happened to them.
Yes.
And I find in this country, we're slowly getting to that point. I'm aware there's a couple of pilot projects out, I think, in Galway, where there are kind of the specialist rooms that are set up now, where you'll have the social worker, the guard, the psychiatrist, or whoever, the clinicians, the people that are there to provide that integrated and comprehensive support. And they're observing the questioning, they're observing the statements, so that the young person doesn't, or the adult, or the you know, they don't have to go through that again. And I think that's something that needs to be probably fast-tracked and rolled out across the country, because it does have an effect on you, because it stops you from talking about it.
Of course.
You know, and it's only because of the treatment that I got in England, the psychological therapies that I engaged with, the unbelievable, you know, support that was given to me was just unreal. Like, you know, like I remember not having a pot to piss in, and my psychiatrist was coming over to the flat, and I'm there, like, you know, I've got a beard like Tom Hanks out of Castaway, and, you know, disheveled, you know, neglected. I think neglect would be the word they'd probably use in their notes. And he'd go, "What's the crack?" And I'm like, grand, yeah. And he goes, "What you eat today?" And I'm like, nothing, you know, I'm not hungry. I didn't have any food. I didn't have anything. You know, I was broke. You know, I lost my job because of my suicide attempt, because I made the national press. The Daily Mail used a lovely picture of me, or, well, not of me, but of a train being lifted off the tracks that looked like it just got mangled and crashed.
Oh, goodness.
You know, in the article. And yeah, so like, naturally, and this is before suicide got cool. And this is before every Tom, Dick, and Harry were coming out and going, "It's okay not to be okay." You know, this is before all these Dark into the Light programs. This is, you know, this is when
stigma, really.
Yeah, it was still there, but stigma still exists.
Yes.
But it's almost kind of, there's an undercurrent of stigma. It's almost like indirect stigma.
Okay.
You know, and it's like, they're happy to have you around, but they're not happy to include you. Right. It's almost like that. You know what I mean?
because
So
they
we just
don't
have to put
quite know what you might do or how stable a person is, maybe, or still the fear factor for people who don't properly understand, probably.
completely, and I think that's where we need to kind of change our approach to how we provide health services. And because if I have cancer
Mm.
and I recover from cancer and I ring that bell, there's a fucking parade down the street.
Mm.
So look at Mick, isn't he great? Sure, he beat that leukemia.
Mm.
Fucking, that's a great. Get him a point next time he's in the pub.
Yeah.
Now let's flip it on its head. Mick's just recovered from bipolar. He's been in recovery for 6 years. Hasn't relapsed. Hasn't been hospitalized. Hasn't self-harmed. He still gets a bit upset, but so does everybody, because that's what it's like having emotions.
Yes.
And Irish people, I'm sorry, but we have emotions and we need to recognize and accept them.
Yeah.
But there won't be a fanfare.
No.
Because people will be like, see that Mick Finnegan fella? He's fucking crazy.
Yeah.
Sure, he took on the English. And there'd be stuff like that, like as if I was some sort of like, I was up on the Bleeding Bridge in London with, half the face painted blue, and it was some sort of, attack that I was kind of, I was completely unwell, and I was sick, and I've recovered from that sickness, and I've recovered to the point where I have an amazing life.
Yeah, I'm so happy to hear it. It's great.
But people still are like, but you never know. And I'm like, well.
But isn't that partly, sorry, Mick, isn't that partly because really of the massive ignorance around mental health and the fact that it's a continuum? We're all on a continuum, and depending on what we experience in life, frankly, from what you just described there and from the articles that I read, it was totally understandable that you were extremely distressed and angry and full of grief and sadness. And, when you were getting help or accessing services, did people want to know, like, were they asking you, Mick, tell me about yourself? What have you been through in life? Have you suffered any of these adversities or traumas?
I remember getting a court report for when I was up. I got prosecuted for the bridge incident.
Right.
Well, I didn't get prosecuted. I got charged, and they dropped the charges because there was a big. So the British Transport Police and the Crown Prosecution Service in England were like, "Fuck him," like we're gonna. Literally, there was no support provided. I got sectioned with the Mental Health Act. I was in hospital in a psychiatric unit. And I was in a locked ward. I couldn't move, couldn't go anywhere. I was in a room, I got my meals, and that was it. Upon discharge, as I was walking out of the hospital colluded with the police service. And as I walked out the front door, the police arrested me. They were waiting for me. They brought me to a police cell. So I was driven from the hospital. Bear in mind, I just went through quite a lot of trauma. Mm-hmm. I've been arrested, thrown in the back of a prison van, brought into a prison cell. Mm-hmm. I was held in a cell overnight. Then I was appeared in court the next day. And my solicitor at the time, Tina O'Donoghue, she was second or third generation Irish, and she was horrified at how I was being treated. Because I didn't hurt anybody.
No.
I didn't commit an offence.
Yeah.
And they were using some old school legislation from I think it was the Suicide Act.
Right.
That they were looking to kind of, prosecute me, for kind of, and even to the extent Transport for London were like, well, we did lose £24,000. We want that back. And I'm like, I just got sacked. I haven't got a penny. Yeah. But no one asked Gianni. No one will ask. Now they do, because it's kind of they've seen that they have to explore those issues, and and clinicians are becoming more ace aware. Yeah. My psychiatrist initially, when I was telling her about my past and where I grew up, she said I was being grandiose because there was no way a place like that would exist.
What did she mean by that?
Grandiose. So I was telling her about my family, growing up in a kind of really, really bad area, heroin everywhere, drugs, criminality, the whole lot. And because I didn't speak like someone who And again, this is a judgment on her part, her part, because I didn't speak like someone that was kind of like that she would perceive as a working class person from Ireland.
Yeah.
I think she was looking for some sort of Brad Pitt type character to kind of say something quite derogatory in relation to kind of how he did his accent in that movie when he was playing a member of the traveling community.
Yes.
So she was kind of being very, well, he pronounces his words properly.
Right.
He enunciates. You know, it was very derogatory. Very.
Yeah, kind of not seduced or put off by certain superficial aspects of you and your story, that it couldn't have possibly been that bad, kind of thing.
Yeah, and like I remember telling her I worked in, you know, because I worked in health and social care and stuff like that, she just assumed I was having a period of, you know, I was going through a period of psychosis.
Right.
Because she thought what I was saying about my life wasn't real.
Right.
There's no way someone who works in health and social care could ever become from that background.
Right.
It was
okay. A bit of privilege as well there, you know, and
yeah, I think so, yeah.
And a lack of curiosity. That's one thing that really strikes me now as a non-expert in this field, but someone who is extremely curious about people and about the human condition, that a lot of mental health services and social work, you know, in the criminal justice context, there's an understanding that poverty is linked to crime, let's say, and linked to addiction. But the wider stuff, the stuff that can go on within the family home or community violence, or certainly stuff like child sex abuse, there isn't always a willingness to go there or to understand.
Why would you ask? Yeah, Jane, why would you ask questions when you're only going to create more work for yourself?
Right, okay. Because you might have...
There's an element of compassion fatigue in that.
Yeah. Okay.
They start off newly qualified. They start off, I'm going to change the world. They're going to walk out of, you know, they got the qualification, UCD, UCC, you know, Trinity. They qualified as social workers, doctors, nurses, you know, clinicians, psychologists, whatever. They start off and they are super keen. And it's a system that breaks them.
Yeah.
System that goes, well, actually, you don't want to put that down because, you know,
open a can of worms.
Exactly. And you're creating more work for yourself. And there's no kind of human rights kind of approach, I think, at times. And very few clinicians are ACE aware. They're not aware of, you know, adverse childhood experiences and the impact that can have on you down the line. You know what I mean? Like,
yes. It's fairly shocking, and very often the pushback that I'll get at talks or events from professionals is, yeah, we're not trained. Let's say social workers will say we're not trained mental health workers, or psychiatrists will say it's all either genetic or chemical imbalances or stuff. But how are we possibly meant to truly help people if we cut off aspects of their narrative for them? You know?
I think, I definitely, I think sometimes, I think it's an element of fear.
Yeah.
I don't think you have to be trained to be kind.
No.
I don't think that costs a lot of training. Either you can be kind or you can be unkind.
Yeah.
Kindness goes a long way to developing a rapport that will ultimately allow you to build a relationship and to work with someone around the issues that they experience. A lot of clinicians take it personally when someone uses the F-bombs, or they drop the C words and they kick off and they're like, but we don't think that these patients or these service users or whatever words they're using now that are so trendy and in you know, evidence-based.
Yeah.
Like, they don't understand that the people that they're working with and trying to support lack the life skills to communicate effectively. Of course I'm going to say fuck off. Of course I'm going to use these words because where I'm from, that is an acceptable language to use.
Sure.
It's like going to France and speaking English and wondering why people aren't speaking English back to you.
Yeah.
Because you're in France.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like, I think that's a really good way of looking at it, because a lot of the time clinicians do take it personal when a service user. I remember sitting one time in a multidisciplinary team meeting and this social worker comes in. Nearly like, you know, I'm not going back out there. You know, he just told me to start effing and being, and I was like, how did he F and B? And he goes, well, he said F this and F that, and then he was trying to talk to me, but I had to remind him of like boundaries. It's not acceptable to speak to me like that. And I'm like, well, you know, maybe he's speaking like that because he's frustrated, he's detained against his will, he's going through a mental health crisis.
Yeah.
Don't take it personal. And I would say that to any clinician, any person that's
Yeah.
working with supporting people, especially people coming from poverty areas, people that have been let down by society, people that are marginalized groups. If they want to swear, let them swear, because sometimes that's the only language that they can use to express how they feel. And I think we need to get past that, because I think there's a bit of high and mighty kind of, can't speak to me like that.
Yeah.
You know, and I'm like, well, you know what, I can, and I did. What are you going to do about it? Do you know what I mean? Like, but it would go a long way to supporting people that we're trying to actually genuinely help.
No, I totally understand what you mean. And from learning about adverse childhood experiences and trauma and the importance of safety and feeling safe around other people, which if you have a rake load of trauma, you don't feel safe around other people, or you don't feel safe in your body. And I think what happens there for service providers is when they hear all the cursing and the mouthful of abuse, they don't feel safe. But if they understood where it's coming from, you're right, you don't take it personally. You kind of shrug it off and go, well, Jane is having a really, really distressed moment. She's outside her window of tolerance. She's just freaked out. And what can I do to help regulate her emotions now?
Absolutely. And like, I worked in a really good example is I worked in Stella Maris in Belfast. It was a wet hostel.
Yeah.
Right? Low threshold.
Yeah.
So, and all the service users had alcohol management plans. They were all kind of like, you know, they got a drink every half an hour, 45 minutes, or an hour, depending on how they behaved and stuff like that. There were times when they got too drunk that we couldn't give them a drink.
Mm.
And this was to stop and reduce the harm of them street drinking and reoffending, and also to provide them a safe place to be. If I had £1 for every time they called me all the names under the sun, I wouldn't need to go to Trinity College to get a job and a career. I'd have a nice house in Foxrock. I'd be minted.
Yeah.
But the thing is, though, I didn't take it personal.
Yeah.
And then I'd be like, all right, well, I'm sorry you feel like that. And you maintain that composure, and you be confident, and you reinforce little things. I'm sorry you feel like that.
Yeah.
How can I help?
Yes.
I don't want that. And then they storm off 2, 5, 10, 15, an hour later, they're coming back. Yeah, I'm really sorry that I told you to. Can I have another can? And you're like, of course you can. Come here, listen, what's the crack?
Yeah.
And it's through that kind of, it's almost, I'm going to use a neck, well, not really. It's almost Rogerian, do you know what I mean? It's it's very person-centered.
Yeah.
You know, and
it helps build trust, I think, because it shows that, you know what, you can hurl a mouthful of abuse at me when you're distressed, and I won't expel you from the service. I won't push you away like everyone else has before. You know, we will help repair these ruptures and go forward. And that's amazing for people, I think.
And that's one of the reasons why I think Dublin has a really good kind of, granted, the housing situation isn't great, but the support for homeless people in Dublin, it's fantastic. You know, Focus Ireland, DePaul, Salvation Army, they all have low threshold services, Merson's Key. You know, I remember being a kid on Focus Ireland, I got kicked out of a cafe for telling one of them, they were like, I think you've had enough. I was like, kicked out. And then there was a new service that was set up for, it was called the Extension. You know, it doesn't exist anymore, but it was for under 18s. You know, it was up around the back of, up around Christchurch area there. And there was a brilliant manager there, Rose Rooney. And Rose was like, you know, she was from the town. She was proper, you know, everyone knew her. She worked in AA. She worked in NA, and, you know, she worked in homeless service. She used to walk and see their house, and like, but the way she interacted with the young, especially the younger ones, you know, the 15-year-olds, the 16-year-olds, you know, it was fantastic. Like the compassion, the support, you know, not turning their back on any of them. You know, even if they were at times little shits, you know what I mean? They were like proper. She literally provided an unbelievable amount of compassion, because she didn't take any of that stuff personally, and she was able to give it back as well.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
She had that level of emotional intelligence to go, listen, don't speak to me like that, because I actually genuinely care about you.
Well, there you go. Yeah. And that's it. You know, she cared. And as you say, lots of people do care, but there there is this fear of the opening the can of worms and not having the skills. But I find that even as a person who has no qualification in psychiatry or psychology or anything else, that if I listen to someone's story and believe them and validate it, there's something very healing or potentially therapeutic in that. Mick, you know, when you were, say, after that incident with the suicide attempt in the UK, and perhaps other times, you know, when you were very distressed,
Yeah.
did you hope someone would open the can of worms and actually ask you, Mick, what's at the root of all of this?
You know, when you're going through kind of that level of distress, it's not so much kind of, you're not looking for someone to ask questions as such, but you're just looking for someone to be there.
Right.
You know,
and to see you, I guess.
Pretty much. And
the
I
real
think
person.
a lot of the time,
yeah,
and like I think sometimes there's times for questions, and then there's times to just shut up and listen. And shutting up and listening isn't so much if that patient or that serious or isn't talking, you think, oh well, I've got to fill the room. No, sit there, be still, just be there. Practical support. Do you want a cup of tea? You know, that rapport comes then. Then you kind of go, how can I support you? Why it took me a long time to open up, and it was a psychiatric nurse actually that in a service that I was in, and I remember breaking down crying, like, and it was the first time I talked about the abuse since it properly happened. You know, I remember, you know, getting like blind drunk and just bawling my eyes out. You know, when I was living in London, I'm just sitting in a park crying. You know, because I wasn't able to deal with the emotions and stuff like that. And I remember chatting to this nurse and saying, look, this is happening to me. I have no family. I've never felt more alone in my life. And she was like, well, look, you know, doesn't mean you can't have your family. And it was something that just always kind of stuck with me. You know, the hope of actually having my own family one day is something that does genuinely give me hope.
Yeah.
And gives me kind of a sense of, not purpose almost, but it gives me kind of just a sense of kind of, I don't know, it's a really weird kind of way. It's a really weird feeling, but it's just one day, you know, it will work out, you know, because I'm doing particularly well. Not particularly, I'm doing very, very well, you know, considering my background and what I went through. But that nurse, eventually, when she asked me those questions, like, what happened? What's the story here? You know, why do you keep acting out? Why do you keep? Because I used to abscond from hospitals. You know, I'd walk out the front door of some hospitals, you know, or break a window, jump out the side, you know, scale down, you know, go missing, go on the run, basically, you know. Not that you're breaking them.
Very strong flight instinct kicked in.
Pretty much. Well, nobody likes being locked up. Nobody likes being detained against their will. And ultimately, that's kind of what happened to me on many, many occasions, to the point where it got to the stage where I got placed in a psychiatric intensive care unit for, what was it? Was it 6 weeks or 8 weeks? 8 weeks, you know, and then being placed then in seclusion, which is effectively a cell.
Yeah.
Take your medication. And I'd be like, take your own medication. You know, I wouldn't be so anti-medication, because it was like, and again, this comes back to stigma. You know, don't be taking those tablets, they're bad for you. But they gave me a level of stability that enabled me to kind of regain, you know, my life. And I don't, and that's the thing. I'm not a big fan, you know, of keeping people on meds.
Yeah.
But medication has its place in mental health service provision.
Yes.
I think the problem with psychiatry is one of the reasons why it kind of struggles maybe at times to kind of provide effective services is because of the people that are going into it. How many people from socioeconomically deprived areas become psychiatrists? How many people from socioeconomically deprived areas become doctors? Do you know what I mean?
Well, there's that, but also if the biomedical model is pathologizing the individual and looking for
but they won't go near the biopsychosocial model.
no,
They're too busy
yeah,
focusing on the medical model of approach, which is, very, it's very archaic.
yeah,
I was chatting to a colleague the other day, who's a psychologist. I won't mention his name, but he was saying psychiatry it's on its last legs because it's
yeah,
archaic in its approach. It's very much about detaining people against their will. Even if you go back to the old institutionalized kind of facilities that were there, they were therapeutic. There were gardens where people worked as horticulturists. There were tennis courts where they could play tennis. They could go ramble and walk forever. And people did recover, and people, did some. Granted, there were some people, and there will always be people that will need prolonged, intensive psychiatric support. But not everybody needs that.
no. You remind me there about Dr. Bessel van der Kolk, who wrote a great book, The Body Keeps the Score, about trauma and the neuroscience behind it. And he says that medications can be so excellent for bringing people from out there back here so that they can actually live their life and function. But over the long haul, if we only resort to medication without exploring root causes or people's stories, their backstories of pain or trauma, if they may not have it, but if we don't go there, how can we possibly know? So you're only medicating symptoms then for people. But Mick, to go back to the actual the child sexual abuse for a moment, because you recently waived your anonymity to speak about this, and there were some powerful articles in the Irish Times about that time in St. John Ambulance as a young boy. Why did you decide to share your story publicly?
Because the John's Ambulance for the last 23 years or however long it's been have really not done anything to support, acknowledge, accept liability. They've done nothing. I've spent over 20 years, trying to get justice, trying to kind of get support from an organisation that I loved, from an organisation that I was actively involved in. There isn't. If there are John's Ambulance members in the John's Ambulance now over the age of 30, I'm pretty sure most of them would have met me at some stage, because I was at every duty, Lansdowne Road, the Horse Show, the Aviva. Sorry, it's called the Aviva now. Crow Park, Mondello Racetrack, Dublin Zoo, St. Patrick's Athletic Football Club, Funderland. I was at every duty that was going, concerts, you name it. And the organisation failed. And it didn't just fail, it spectacularly kind of just decided we're going to hide behind this legal response on our solicitors and say we can't comment for legal reasons because it's an ongoing trial. But there are two things. One, this happened. Two, a state agency said it happened. TUSLA carried out a retrospective investigation in 2018. They found against him. They found that the allegations against him.
Was that important for you, Mick?
Massively, yeah, because you're there, like the DPP. They have their remit and they have their role. But look, I think sometimes for me it was very hard to deal with. For a long time, very hard, to the point where I was ridiculed, mocked, laughed. When I went to the John's Ambulance initially, because I thought if I told them, they'd help.
Yeah.
Because I left because he ran a unit that was basically untouchable. It was left to its own devices because nobody wanted to deal with him because he was a difficult person to deal with anyway. But more so because he was a senior officer.
Mm.
And at the time, he was protected by the then commissioner, who he sadly passed away. The commissioner that was around at that time.
Mm.
So he was protected, you know. But we found out through various people in the John's Ambulance, senior officers, they're still in charge of the John's Ambulance, still running the John's Ambulance, people who hold some of the highest ranks within that organisation, and even their Council of St. John, which is a separate body that actually they run the organisation.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they're almost like a board of directors.
Sure.
But they all knew about him. You know, you only have to look at the Facebook comments that were put on the past and present members group, and you know, there was a woman there saying, well, I was a member in the 1980s and we knew about his questionable training methods with cadets.
Right.
And cadets is the term that they would use for kids.
Mm.
Anyone under the age of, I think, 17 was a cadet, you know. And we never got any support off the John's Ambulance. And then, like, you know, I came across their centenary picture, album photo, 100 years of the John's Ambulance. And I saw a picture of all the original officers. I remember seeing this picture in Leeson Street in the headquarters. You know, it was all the old school officers.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there were loads of people in it, you know. And he was photoshopped out of it.
Right.
So I have the original photo,
yeah,
with him in it, but the John's Ambulance submitted a copy of their 100 years of St. John's Ambulance, their centenary celebration booklet, to the National Library of Ireland, and it sits there, you know, with compliments from the secretary. Because I went in and I had a look, you know, the journalist that did the Irish Times piece, he went in and had a look as well.
Jack Power.
Jack Power, yeah, and like, I didn't wave my anonymity to kind of, you know, have people feel sorry for me. I waved it because there are multiple victims out there that haven't come forward, that are struggling with probably a lot of stuff that they haven't addressed.
Mm.
You know, I know of at least 2 lads that have recently made it known to me that they also were the victims of abuse by this guy. There were complaints going back to the 60s and 70s about this guy to the organisation.
So and there could be a lot of victims and survivors.
I think there probably is. And, you know, this guy was untouchable. You know, he was the, you know, senior officers would remark and say, oh, we need him.
Yeah.
We need him.
Right.
Which leads you to believe, well, why do you need them? Like, you know, but they allowed him to use the organisation as a hunting ground to prey on vulnerable, disaffected and marginalised people. Because he never like, it was always kind of, I don't know, he just used to always isolate his you know, you would go on a duty with him. You know, you'd end up going to the zoo or the, you know, wherever, and he would use first aid as a tool to kind of instigate the abuse, and he would try and make out that, oh, well, this is what you need to do, because if you want to be, you need to be able to look at the human body, you need to be able to do this, you know, you need to be, and he was so convincing. You know, as a kid, you think, fuck, yeah, well, this is what it takes to be a paramedic, then let's do this, like, you know, and then like when you're young, you don't really realize what you're doing, and then as you get older, you realize then it's sexualized because you're surrounded by what's going on in the media, what you see on the TV, and then you know that that what's happening is wrong.
Yeah.
But when I went to our organization originally, I met with their assistant commissioner, who he's passed away. And I met him in a hotel, and he tried to offer me cash. Not in a way to shut me up or to bribe me. I genuinely think he just felt sorry for me.
Right. Okay. So you feel that he did believe you, and
I
this was
think he
a
did
kind of
believe. Well, he said he told me there was he told me that the John's Ambulance always have like caretakers in their building, and normally a senior officer. Because I think there's an apartment or a flat in there. If I remember correctly, I think there's a flat or an apartment upstairs or somewhere in the house that's on Lisa Street. And there was an officer in there, and a mother came up. And this is in the 90s, the early 90s. So I'm sitting in the hotel, listening to this fella tell me that a mother of a child went there to say, look, this fella did this and this to me kid. The officer that was living there at the time went off and got pens and paper or whatever he wanted to do to get the details of the woman. When she came back, she was gone.
Right.
Now, if you're an organisation, whether it's the health service or a bank or wherever, someone makes an allegation against someone of that nature, that person is suspended immediately and a full investigation is carried out. Then at no point did this happen. You know, like he was best mates with the child protection officer.
Gosh.
Within the organisation. They used to meet for breakfast in the hospital that she worked in. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
And like that for me is frustrating because, you know, if the child protection officer is there to safeguard children, who I never met her. I had a phone call with her once on the phone. And she was a doctor.
Wow, okay. Yeah.
And they were, you know, she was meeting with this guy. Instead of going, well, actually, you know what? I don't think it's appropriate for me to deal with this because I'm actually friends with this. I'm compromised and I'm friends with this guy. And the thing is, though, you know, the great thing about medics is they're very well versed in policies and procedures because they have to know policies and procedures because before you even start working in a hospital, because I've worked in a couple of hospitals across the UK and the north of Ireland, you know, the first thing you do when you go into a hospital when you start on your first day, you have an induction.
Yeah.
You go through your induction, you get your induction pack, you go through it all, do's, don'ts, where this is, where that is. So you know what's right and what's wrong. And I did think it was morally wrong for her to be involved in that process. But nothing came of it because the health service weren't made aware of it until I drunkenly wrote the former commissioner, Patrick Plunkett, who used to be the old consultant in James's Hospital. He's also a doctor. An email, and he graciously and very kind of he apologized. You know, he said he was sorry.
Yes.
And that he only became aware there was some concern around him when he took over the role as commissioner.
Yeah.
But then the decision appears to be, and I remember the words black and white because I read it, I broke down crying reading it. But it helped.
Yes.
It helped so much. And he said, but the decision appears to be taken to persuade him to resign as a sadly belated attempt to protect vulnerable children.
Yeah, too little, too late for you.
Completely, and that's one of the reasons. Like, the thing for me isn't so much about kind of shaming the John's Ambulance into kind of dealing with this. Like they'll have to deal with it. You know, they can't ignore it. But they are doing that, and they're hoping that this will all go away, and that they'll look to kind of try and avoid going to court and all that jazz. And for me, you know, it's one of the reasons why I've written to several government ministers. There are people in that organisation that should not still be in that organisation.
Yeah.
Because they're
tainted by that experience.
They're tainted by that experience, but there were people there, you know, there are people there in the organisation that knew about him and did nothing. come here. If that wasn't a good enough defense for the Nazis in Nuremberg,
Yeah.
I don't think it's a good enough defense for the John's Ambulance in Dublin.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know what I mean? And I'm sorry to kind of use two extremes, but to say, oh, well, I knew about him, but we didn't know.
Yeah.
But then if you knew about him, why didn't you
Yeah.
stop him? Why didn't you protect?
Yes. And if there were stories circulating from the 60s, you know, and they were coming up again and again over the decades, they were on notice. But unfortunately, it just sounds like so many of the other organizations in this country where there were adults preying on children, and the policies and procedures that were in place were not child-centered. You know, they were not truly about protecting children. To just
the only thing they're
Sorry.
Jane, the only thing they're interested in protecting is their reputation.
Yeah.
That's
but
it.
Their reputation is shot now. That's the thing. You know, these things can happen anywhere there are people, frankly. Yeah. You know, and
I'm still kind of, and again, apologies for cutting across it, but I'm still shocked and almost angry that they had the audacity to Photoshop him, and then out of their official photo, and then use the Photoshop photo for their 100-year centenary.
Yeah. Well, it's erasing history, you know.
Yeah. Why would you do that?
Because of the shame. I mean, and there is a shame, but it's his shame and their shame, no one else's shame, you know. Yeah. But to talk briefly again, just because I know we've taken quite a lot of your time, but
no, it's okay.
How did you feel about reporting to the Gardaí at quite an early stage? You know, a lot of the time people don't tell anyone about these things for decades, if ever. And how did it feel as a young boy who'd experienced this to go to the police and be told by one or two of them, go off and stop spreading your lies, and then to be believed by another but have it go nowhere?
But I think that comes down to kind of the organisation at the time and the lack of training probably around sexual violence for guards. Like, I have a lot of respect for the police. You know, some of my friends are members of the Garda. We laugh and joke about it because, you know, some of them have actually arrested some of me. They arrested some of my family. And we, you know what I mean? And we go, we laugh and joke about that when we're having a pint, in town and stuff. But, you know, I think that comes down to kind of lack of training and lack of kind of education. I think you can only judge people on what they know. Personally, I think that's
true. So
I don't have, you know, I don't have a lot of anger or any. I have no negative things to say about the Gardaí because the Gardaí investigated. Right. The guards investigated, and they investigated not once but twice. Okay. And, you know, Dermot Saunders and Detective Shane Curtis, or Sergeant Curtis as he's known now, like, they did a fantastic job. They did a fantastic job because, like, I was in London. He didn't have to go and send me an email going, here, Mick, there's if I send 2 cops from the Met Police or whatever constabulary, will you give them a statement? Can I have authorization to review your investigation? Like, he wrote to me back in 2015 and said other victims have come forward. So for me, the guards did their job, and they did their job very, very well, I feel. But I don't think it's the guards that need to be answering questions. I think it's probably the DPP and how they kind of view their burden of proof. You know, they need
what
proof
level of evidence.
Exactly. And here's the thing, and this is what really annoys me. I sit down and read the paper, and there'll be a fella from Cork, or there'll be a fella from Mayo, or there'll be a priest in, I don't know, some country place, right? Or in Dublin even. And they've given no comment interviews. And the person there goes, oh yeah, he fondled me and he molested me, and CPP, right, we're taking this to court. And it goes to court and the fella gets convicted. No, but we've got 3 victims here. Not one, not two, but three victims who went to the cops, who gave over evidence, psychological evidence, medical evidence, you know, the Tussler report.
Yeah.
Everything. Okay. It's a bit fishy.
Yeah.
It is a bit fishy. And for me, you know, as someone who kind of, you know, believes in kind of a process and everything else, I remember sitting down with one of the social workers in Tussler, and she said, I cannot believe that this man has not been prosecuted given the amount of evidence you have, because I have seen cases with
a fraction.
Nothing. Nothing. And they're getting prosecuted left, right, and centre.
Yeah.
So, and I think that's one of the big things for us, and I think one of the things that will probably stop other victims coming forward. For sure, Mick, Martin, and Paul came forward, and you know, they were told to take a one skip and a jump.
And were you given any explanation by the DPP's office as to why, or
no? We even appealed it. Just said there wasn't enough evidence.
Yeah, well,
which isn't equitable in the but it isn't equitable in the DPP's responses to other investigations.
Yes, it is.
Other cases,
as you say, given the fact that so few cases of sexual violence, whether, you know, as adult victims or child survivors, are reported and prosecuted anyway, this certainly is quite discouraging to victims and survivors coming forward, because it's like, why go through it all?
Completely. Come here, I totally relate to the abhorrent violence that women face on a regular basis from men who are predatory, and women that are sexually assaulted and raped, and they don't go to the police. They don't put themselves through that because very few cases ever reach court. Unless, do you know what I mean? And I can relate to that because it's heartbreaking. It is absolutely heartbreaking and emotionally draining and traumatizing to the point where you put yourself through the system. You trust the system. You hope the system will support you. You hope the system will hold the people to account that have hurt you. And the system lets you down.
Yeah.
The system ultimately lets you down because there are people judging this case on whatever factors, and it's based on one thing: can I get a conviction or not? And the reality is, I don't think that's the reason you should go to court or not go to court. The reality is, if something has happened, it goes to court, and you let the people decide.
Let the people.
I think so, and that's the truth. I think if something has happened, you let the people, the courts. Because it's not, I don't think it's for one fella in a fancy suit with a nice degree from King's Inn to decide whether or not Mick Finnegan, Martin Howie, and Paul Mulholland were sexually abused over a period of years and months or whatever.
Yeah.
He's only reading what's in front of him in black and white. And I think that's the big thing. And it's not about the lack of evidence, because there was a lot of evidence. Yeah. Trust me, there was a lot of evidence.
Yeah.
But there's stuff we couldn't use. Like we have, I'll be honest with you, the Photoshop photo, and then there's other stuff that I can't actually talk about because
it's ongoing or whatever. But also, Mick, do you think it could be his age? Because he's very elderly now, isn't he? And he's 80.
He's still driving around in a silver Ford Transit.
Right.
He's still driving around. Like this fella, was feigning dementia in police interviews. Then went to court or wherever he went to. Not court. He went to hospital.
And
nothing wrong with him.
Would it make a difference to you?
And he's sick. I remember his Tussler tried to engage with him, and he hid behind the health card.
Yeah, that he's unwell.
Yeah. Now, come here and I tell you, again, I'm only looking at some of the. I think if you sexually abuse and rape a child or a woman or anyone, that's abhorrent. That is one of the worst things you can do to someone, by killing them, because that person has to carry that.
Well, it's a life sentence. Yeah, it is a life sentence for the victim, for the survivor. Yeah.
It's not even that. It even puts people off being your friend. It puts people off from developing relationships.
Yeah.
Because they are like literally like straight
Trust.
away you're already on the back foot.
Mm.
Do you know what I mean? And I look at some countries, and it doesn't matter how old you are. Doesn't matter how old you are. Like, I don't think age should bar you from being prosecuted.
No. And
do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, I think there's a bit of me. I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but there's a little bit of me thinking he's protected somewhere, and that's the truth.
Right. Okay. And do you think you would find it satisfying if he had been prosecuted and convicted? Would you be hoping then for imprisonment?
I wouldn't take any satisfaction from going through any process like that. For me, I have, and a lot of people go, how did you do that? I had to do it. I've forgiven him. I've forgiven that organization. But it's not about them, and it's not about me. It's about the fact that people need to be held accountable, because there are other victims out there that have gone through this, that the organization have actually done nothing to, like, there's no support. There was no referrals to any. The only reason that referral came in to Tulsa was because I sent a drunk email to the commissioner. Right. He was in a psychiatric unit in London. Do you know what I mean? I'm like giving them, I'm sending them like, and F you and F the organization, and this happened, and if you don't believe me, then whatever. And then he sends this really lovely email back saying, like, a couple of days later, genuinely full of compassion. And I think you can even see that in the interview that he gave to the Irish Times in that article, where he does say, I tried to change the organization, but there were members in that organization from the 40s and 50s that were slow to change. They didn't want change. They didn't want to professionalize. Yeah. The fact that when he took over that organization, there still wasn't even Garda checks or vetting. Yes. And you're providing a health service. Yeah. You're the first responders for some of the biggest sporting events in the country, and you're only getting around to do Garda vetting now. Yeah. I hear. That's like me opening up James. Yeah. Come here, but that's like me opening up James's hospital and going to all my mates. Right, Anto, come on in. Oh, Vic, I was done for armed robbery back in the. It doesn't matter. Come on. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? It just wouldn't go down. Slow to learn and try to make amends, because that's the thing. There's no one doing it, but there is a need to atone and to face the facts and the reality and vow to be better, vow to be better. There are other organizations that have turned around and they've taken ads out in papers. They have set up helplines. They have done so much, despite the wrong that they've done. But they have recognized we made a mistake. We are very sorry. I don't think they understand how powerful and how that will impact someone's life for the better. If they actually said, you know what? Yeah, we got this wrong. We failed you. Come here. One of the big things within the NHS in England, there was a campaign years ago, duty of candour. It was a big policy. It was like, boom. Because everyone was like, I'm not telling them I said that. I'm not. Oh, come here. I gave your woman the wrong meds. What will I do? Yeah. Say nothing. Yeah. Should be grand. It's only paracetamol. Suffering culture, the fear culture, yeah. Completely. But that duty of candour went a long way to improving the services for millions of people. Millions of people. And I don't understand why in Ireland today, 2020, we still have this toxic, corrupted culture where we refuse to acknowledge systemic childhood abuse. Yeah. That has happened within an organization that, to be fair, was quite a big organization. Is a big organization that was at the cornerstone of some of our country's biggest turning points in our history. The 1916 Rising. You know, they were on the streets providing first aid.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
World War II. You know, they were on the streets providing first aid. When the ambulance services go on strike, they go out and they provide first aid. You know what I mean? And I'm, you know, I was proud to wear that uniform. I was proud to be a part of that organization. And despite the horrific abuse and rape that I experienced, there was times I actually loved being there.
Yeah, I'm sure, you know, that makes sense to me. Yeah,
I did. Like, I remember when I put a transfer request. I left his unit. I went to Walkinstown Division, and within about a year, I ended with me and three other lads. 4 of us all together. We entered this national first aid competition. It was like the Novice Cup. So you had units from all over Ireland competing. And the competition was held in Leeson Street. And one of our teammates, he said he was sick, but I think he was on the drink the night before and was hungover and didn't show up. So there's only 3 of us. So we asked the lads, could we participate and still compete in the competition? Only because we were already there, we were in uniform, we were ready to kind of, you know, we won the competition. We won that. And, you know, that's a testament to the training that we got as first aid professionals, you know, as first responders or whatever language people want to use now. But I couldn't be more proud. I remember being there, you know, with the cup, and we won it. But we won it. We were the first team in the history to win it with 3 men.
Yeah.
It's a 4-man competition. Right. So it was a big thing.
You were exceptionally gifted.
And everyone was like,
yeah.
I don't know about that, but we did all right, like, you know what I mean? And like, I couldn't believe it. And it was one of it was one of my biggest achievements. I was in that organization for over 10 years.
Okay.
I loved it. You know what I mean? I loved it.
In spite of the pain and the...
In spite of that. But then when all that happened, and then you end up on the streets homeless, and you're eating out of bins, and you're sleeping rough in the inner city, and you're queuing up outside in the rain to try and get a boiled egg and a bit of toast in the morning because you haven't eaten in 2, 3, 4 days. You don't love it then. You know what I mean? You hate it.
You hate it. And you probably justifiably hate some of the enablers as well who failed to
I wouldn't say hate. Hate's a strong word for people that haven't, you know, hates. I don't hate them. I feel sorry for them. I feel sorry for them that they lack the integrity to do the right thing.
Sorry, Mick.
Then I hated everybody. Yeah. No, then I hated everybody. Like, I'll be honest with you, I hated myself. Hated my family. Hated homeless services. I hated my community welfare officer at the time. You know, I hated queuing up outside the homeless persons unit in James Street to try and get a bed for the night. I hated Santa Maria Hostel. I hated, I think it's gone now. You know, I hated all those environments because it was horrible. No one should experience going through, you know, that. Nobody should experience going through, you know, or navigating through homeless services because it's dangerous. It's incredibly difficult. It's, you know, and I wouldn't be here if it wasn't, you know, for the support Howard. You know, Howard gave me a job in London.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like, he was like, do you want to work in one of the hostels in London? And I ended up in Whitechapel. Do you know what I mean? Working in the East End. And I loved it.
He sounds like he was what Gabor Mate describes as an empathetic witness, you know, a good, kind, loving guy who just saw the good and the potential in you and knew there was a story, whether you told him or not, you know?
Yeah, and he wouldn't push on, you know, and even today, even like I would get a phone call or a text off him every other day. Like, he's always kind of, and that's been the case for the last 20 odd years, you know, and it was just what he did for me isn't foreign to him.
Yeah.
There's probably hundreds that he supports.
Yeah.
Like that. And it's weird, like, because I remember, like, we would go for lunch in Dublin and be walking through town, and there'd be old school IV drug users, walking down, Henry Street or wherever. Oh, Jesus, Howard, what's the story? And it's like, and straight away, he might be gone, from working in Cedar House and within homeless services, because there was a point where he was the director of homeless services for the UK and Ireland, for the Salvation Army. Do you know what I mean? So he wasn't just some, frontline worker who was just kind of like doing being compassionate. This fellow was a senior. Like, he'd be the equivalent of Hedge. Sorry, Peter McFerry. He'd be the equivalent of Peter McFerry. Do you know what I mean? Like, Peter goes into the prisons, goes into the, the hostels. He has his little drop-in centre. He has, goes everywhere.
Yeah.
Because he knows the value of that support. And Peter gave me a job working as a support worker in one of his hostels in over in Drumcondra there in the Whitwood Road, opposite Mount Joy. Do you know what I mean? I was working in there back in the day as well. So, like,
you've been around, yeah.
But I think, Ivan, that's just a testament to, my commitment and willingness to work in health and social care.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Because for me, it's not about academic qualifications. For me, it's about being kind. And I think that from kindness is key. And you'd be surprised, and people will go, sure, I'm kind. And I'm like, but you're not, because you just told that service user that you were busy when you're just eating a Mars.
That's right.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like,
yeah. Being present is very important as well, isn't it? Giving that time when someone asks for help.
100%. When I'm in work, or if I'm working, with different services, I switch my phone off.
Yeah.
I switch my personal mobile phone off because I don't want to be distracted. Because when I'm in work, I have a duty of care. And that duty of care is to try and meet the immediate and practical needs of the people I'm supporting in some way or another, but also not promising something I can't deliver.
Yes.
It's a big thing.
That's
the amount of people that go, come here, I tell them the amount of people I met when I was a kid on the streets, and social workers would be sitting in the McDonald's, and they'd be like, so I'm going to get you a flat. And I'm like, are you now? Brilliant.
Yeah, under promise and over deliver is better.
Never got a flat off them. Never got on. The only thing I got was a Happy Meal or a Big Mac if I was lucky.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? And then once I finish that, I go, I'm going to go to the toilet. I'll be back in a second. And then I just walk out the front door and leave it. Do you know what I mean? And that was, I'm not going to lie, because it was a waste of my time to engage with someone who wasn't really interested in providing me with support. And it was only basically buying me a burger so she could fill out her notes to say that she linked in with me for that day. Or he. Yeah. You know what I mean? There was a couple of them. I used to walk out the front. I remember going into McDonald's with them. I'd tell them whatever they wanted to hear. Go along with it.
Yeah, to get your needs met. Get the food.
And then they were like, she was like, oh, do you want anything else? I said, I'm going to go to the toilet. I'll be back in a minute. And I'd walk around. And I wouldn't go upstairs. I'd just walk out the front door on Grantham Street. And then I'd have like a load of angry missed phone calls and texts off her and going next one and said, and then I get transferred onto someone else because I was too difficult. And the reality was I wasn't too difficult.
Yeah.
You just weren't interested.
That's right. Listening. Yeah. They weren't asking the right questions and they weren't listening, as you say, to what was being said. Mick, just two other tiny ones. Well, actually, this is a massive one. What has actually helped you with your healing or your recovery, whichever word you prefer?
Well, we can say healing or recovery, depend, because some people don't like recovery because there's kind of negative connotations to kind of being kind of, I'm clean and sober, and I'm like, well, actually, I still have a point on a weekend. Yeah. Like, it's not the be all and end all. But I think what has helped me was forgiving those that have hurt me. That was paramount in my recovery, with my mental health, was forgiveness, and engaging with mental health services, because I didn't need her. I remember going missing in London, and there was a bleeding manhunt, to the point which I think it resulted in me getting tasered by the Met because I ran off in Hyde Park. So I was like,
A bit of
Remember
a
what was
need
they
for
say? Are you Mick?
training for the police, I think, in fairness.
Yeah, I remember. I'll give you a laugh. I remember going, "What was it? Are you Mick Finnegan?" And I was like, "No." And I was all like feral because I was
Yeah,
like, sleeping rough for days
yeah,
and months or weeks, I think, at the time. Feral, and I was eating out bins, and
yeah,
I think I was in Hyde Park, and I was just
yeah.
completely just in my own little kind of random world. And I turned and legged that, and he just went, and that was it. And the next thing I woke up in the hospital, and that was the end of that. But I think the big thing for me around kind of my recovery is kind of dealing with the trauma,
Right.
dealing with it, and it's fucking hard. It is
Yeah.
so hard, and there's no professional word I can use to describe how hard it is, because it is hard. But you have to be honest, and you have to be real, and you have to explore the stuff you don't want to explore. Like, I never want to explore the fact that because of the rape that I experienced, I bleed from my back passage and I'm incontinent.
Oh gosh, okay.
You know what I mean? And I refuse to acknowledge that. So then staff would, I remember nurses, they would just assume I was being lazy. But I had no diagnosis. And then when I got referred to what's the word again? Colorectal
Colorectal, right.
consultant, he just was like, Jesus, how long have you had that? And I said, like, since I was a kid. And I had an operation where I had a really bad infection and an abscess for years. And I used to always get sharp pains where I wouldn't, but your man then was like, right, we're going to deal with this, and then we're going to help you kind of manage this. And I was embarrassed and ashamed to kind of even own that.
Yes.
But that's not my fault. I remember sitting in a counselling session with someone, with my psychologist, and sitting with her, and I was chatting to her and I was telling her all this stuff, and I said, look, I'm embarrassed about this. How do I say, if I'm in a, if I'm in a social situation? Or I remember being in a social situation with a girl that I was dating in Belfast for a little bit, and we went into town and we had some nice food in the Belfast market, and we went to her brother's house, met his wife and the dog, and I was so embarrassed that I was incontinent that I had to keep going upstairs to the toilets, to the point where I blamed the oysters we had the day before, or that morning, on me being in the toilet. And I tried to make light of it. But the reality was I was in the toilet crying my eyes out because I couldn't stop what was happening.
Okay.
But over time and getting kind of more kind of stuff done to me around kind of that and managing that, and then looking at the psychological impact of that, and also the other stuff that happened, the homelessness, the rejection that I experienced from my family, massive. But I was able to kind of really explore that, break it down, and come to terms with that. But it took years. This isn't something that just...
No.
And I think that's where a lot of kind of medics kind of fail to realize that it takes years. There's no medication that will get you to kind of this point in your life.
No.
It is addressing the root cause of why you behave the way you behave. I remember getting the letter from Tusla, and I made a point to go and see my dad because he called me a liar. Didn't believe me.
Believe you?
No, didn't. And last year I went to him and showed him the letter. And this is before I started in Trinity and all this stuff. Actually, no, it was in and around. I just started in Trinity. I was only a student, maybe a month, if that. And I went in to see him. I had read that, and he was like, "I haven't got any money. If that's what you're after." I was like, "No, I'm not after any money. I just wanted to show you something. I hope you're okay." And he read the letter, and he broke down crying in front of me.
Okay.
And I mean, to the point where he was like a fucking child.
Yeah.
Crying.
Yeah. Shuddering. Yeah.
Yeah. And he punched the wall. And then he did something for the first time that I've never experienced in my life. with my father.
Yeah.
He gave me a hug. He hugged me.
Right.
And he broke down crying again, squeezing me so hard that I couldn't probably breathe properly. He kept kissing me on the cheek and he said, "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry."
Wow.
And that was last year. And, you know, I was 36 when I went for, you know, for my first point with my dad.
Right.
And my uncle Johnny, his brother. Do you know what I mean? And we're sitting in this dodgy pub in Inchicore in Dublin, and he was like, "That's my son," showing off everyone, and he was like, full on, couldn't be prouder.
Yeah.
And then I turned around and I said to him, "Oh, here I'm after getting into Trinity."
Yeah.
And he was like, "Go on and ask me bollocks, you didn't get into Trinity College. You fucking mad. They wouldn't let us in there." Right? And I was like, "Fair enough."
Yeah.
Said, "Well, if you want, you can come in and check one day." I even showed him my student card.
Yeah.
And he's like, "Sure, you can make one of them." Like,
Your fake ID.
yeah, he's like, "I could make one of them." So Blade and Tony around the corner does the driver's license, and I was like, "Geez, shut up, Blade." So I was there, like, whatever, chatting away, and I was in school one day, and lo and behold, he went down to the college, onto the campus, had a couple of drinks, and wasn't drunk, but
Yeah.
I think that was probably for nerves more than anything.
Yeah.
And it was almost like that kind of Down Thomas, you know, you had to stick the fingers through the holes in the hands.
What
And he was on campus.
boy is there? Like that?
Yeah, he couldn't believe it. And I managed to get a picture in front, in front square, just in front of the campanile, me and him.
Lovely.
There. And it was brilliant. But I wouldn't have got that if it wasn't for Tussler.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? I wouldn't have got that
moment
year with my dad.
Yeah, and that special moment.
That moment's important and fantastic, but I wouldn't have got the year with him.
Yeah.
The year where we, you know, pre-COVID, we'd sit in the Black Forge pub.
Yeah.
Drinking pints together in you know, in Crumlin, Drimnagh, sitting next to him, you know, and he was, you know.
That's really important about how Tusla helped that relational repair for both of you, you know.
Because, massively. Like, it wouldn't have happened, Jane. It wouldn't have happened. You know, because for him it had to be in black and white.
Yeah, he needed the proof.
And I was telling him about the interview I did with Jack Power, and he was like, "Oh Jesus, can't wait to read that. I've a good mind to go down to that fucker's house and batter him." And he'd always say that with a few drinks in him. You know, if I see him on the street, I'll wring his neck. But my dad was getting old, and he was getting he was becoming more frail, and then like I only kind of noticed that probably maybe a couple of weeks before he was admitted to James's hospital, and was sitting next to him, and he goes to me, you know, "Hope that big ginger wreck is okay in London, Kieran."
Right.
He was on it.
Right.
And I was just like, and I've done a couple of dementia friendly courses, and you kind of have to go along with that.
Yeah.
But it wasn't until then that I kind of realised he's kind of
a bit of a decline.
Completely, cognitively, anyway,
Oh.
And then he was made to James's hospital on the 3rd of August, and then he passed away the 9th of August.
This year?
This year, a couple of weeks ago.
I'm so sorry to hear that, but at least you had that year. You know.
Yeah, no, that's why, and that's why it was really important. You're probably wondering why I was labouring that point, but that's why, because like for me to have that year with my dad, you know, because he only passed away there. What was it? Yeah, it was the 9th. Yeah, the 9th of August.
Yeah, that closeness, that and just the repair, the resolution,
completely,
and the bit of fun together. You know, that is kind of precious. Just one last question, Mick, because I could talk to you forever. There's so much more that we could.
No, come here, listen. It's okay.
Maybe another time.
Ask as many questions. Follow up. Ask as many questions you want.
But just this one, because the whole topic of the show has been on how to talk policy and influence people. What would you like to see change? You know, you mentioned writing to some government ministers, but either in relation to child protection or saying how we deal with people with trauma histories, you know, people in homeless services or addiction or prisons or whatever, mental health services, what would you like to see change?
Co-production.
Right. And what do you mean by that, Mick?
Co-production is basically nothing about us. Nothing about us. What's it again?
Without us.
Without us, yeah. Nothing about us without us. Because the reality is, you know, if you have ex-prisoners, ex-patients, ex-trauma survivors, ex-whoever, if you want to have a fully comprehensive integrated service that meets the needs of the population of this country, then you need to co-produce those services, and that needs to be ingrained within in how you deliver those services. Because without that, it's tokenistic. Because the reality is, while you have all the academic qualifications in the world, you haven't been a prisoner in Mountjoy. You haven't suffered sexual assault and rape. You haven't experienced childhood sexual abuse. You haven't been homeless. You know what I mean? I remember years ago, there were all these homeless forums in Dublin. There was all these kind of service user led kind of initiatives like Ishka and all that. And that's fantastic and it's great. But we need to really, really embed those.
It has to be the norm.
I think so. And like, come here, listen, if I've no idea why, you know, I was given the opportunity in England. I think it's because they saw that I recovered and that I was doing quite well in life. That they gave me the opportunity to implement change with clinicians, with academics, with politicians. To the point where that is now how, that is the best practice. That is the evidence base. That's what makes a real and lasting difference in the lives of the people that we're trying to support. That's how we break down the barriers, stop marginalization, and ultimately include everyone in our society. You know what I mean? I'm not talking about, you know, just, you know, the rubbish you see on social media that's toxic where, you know, it's Irish for the Irish. No, I'm on about everyone. I'm on about everybody. You know, if you're, you know, a refugee, if you're a migrant, if you're, you know, a member of the LGBTQI community, if you're a member of the traveling community, if you're a member of the Afro-Caribbean community, if you're a member of any community that is represented in this country, then you need to have a place at the table and some sort of working group to develop policies and procedures that meet the needs of your community, because it's the only way we can change things. It's all well and good having the politicians up there, but they're not experts.
Yeah.
They're not experts, and they listen to these overvalued and overpriced advisors. They're getting paid 100 and, I don't know, Jesus, how much they're getting paid. They're getting paid loads.
Too much.
Right.
Yeah.
But they're getting paid loads, right?
Yeah.
But they're not even the experts.
No, I know.
Because they're academic, brilliant. And come here, listen, I'm pursuing an academic qualification myself. Academia has its place, but we need those experts by experience because they can shape our service, our community, our environment for the better. Because if we don't include,
we do harm.
Everyone, we will do harm, and we will continue to reinvent the wheel. And it's just it's a cycle. You know, we just go around in circles. We don't recognize it because it'll be 20, 30, 40 years down the line, but the same shit will happen again.
Yeah. I couldn't agree more with you. I'm a big fan of co-production, and a friend of mine, Elizabeth Perry from Canada, uses the phrase first voice wisdom, which I like, as well as, you know, experts by experience. But it is the way forward, and it has to be real. It has to be across the board, like you say, not just a tokenistic thing.
Exactly, and that's the problem. You know, a lot of the time when people are well-intentioned and they mean well, and they say, for instance, I know in mental health services, when they start to include peer support workers, people with lived experience in mental illness working within psychiatric units, a lot of medical and a lot of professionals were like, Jesus, lads, it's like the lunatics taking over the asylum. Can't be having that. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? And it was tokenistic and it was very condescending. Yeah. Sure, look at him there in his uniform. Isn't he great? And it was almost kind of like a Mrs. Doyle kind of approach. Look at him. You know, it was very negative.
Yeah.
But now, you know, I've been very lucky to be part of the expert reference group in England that developed a competency framework for peer support in partnership with NHS Improvement, Health Education England, the Royal College of Psychiatrists, and the National Collaborating Centre for Mental Health. You know, so this is the new way of working.
Yeah.
But it scares the living shit out of anyone that's looking from the outside that isn't experiencing that. Because in England, it's the evidence base.
Yeah.
In Ireland, we don't have many peer support workers within inpatient units.
No.
We have them in the community, and that's about it. And we have them in drop-in centres, and that's about it. And the reality is, if you want to really make a difference, you need to include them across the board.
Yeah.
It has to be that parity of esteem, and that doesn't exist. You know, it doesn't exist. You know what I mean? And that's why, you know, people are, especially me, I'm always kind of reluctant to kind of go, you know, because I get asked a lot, do you want to do this or do you want to get, and I'm like, well, how is it going to work? You know, you're going to have so-and-so working with you, but ultimately whatever you say goes, or is it an equal voice at the table? And everyone goes, well, look, whatever. But I know there's some services in the UK that have a service user consultants who's at the same banding as a doctor. If he isn't happy, it's not happening.
Right.
Now that would be like
that's
in this
true
country.
Power sharing, you know, as opposed to maintaining the current hierarchy with one spot for a nice, calm, never angry, never challenging ex-service user.
There's a wonderful psychiatrist in London. He works in the Maudsley, Dr. Hamid Hakir. He goes by the Twitter handle, The Wounded Healer.
Oh, I know him. Yeah, I follow him. Really good.
Brilliant guy. I love him to bits. I learn a lot from him. But he said something that was really amazing on Twitter a while back. And he said, real co-production gets real results.
We'll leave it there, Mick. Yeah. That's kind of, we'll leave that sink in for whoever chooses to tune into this. I hope lots of people do. I'll certainly be sending it on to all the policymakers I know, because your experience and your insights and all the work you've done in various contexts is so really, truly so important. And thank you for sharing your story with me and for taking the time and for being so brave to, you know, put it out there. I think it will help people. I really do. And hopefully shift the landscape in ways that needs to be shifted. So this has been How to Talk Policy and Influence People with me, Jane Mulcahy. My guest was Mick Finnegan. Thanks so much, Mick, and best of luck with everything.
You're welcome. Thank you, Jane.
Bye now.
Bye-bye.